When it comes to racing games on the PlayStation 1, there are many racing gems on the console, like Ridge Racer Revolution, Colin McRae Rally 2, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, and of course, Test Drive. However, there's one racing game that stood above the pack of racing games, one that not only became the most influential racing game at the time, but also the best-selling game on the PlayStation 1. The game I'm talking about is Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo was released on December 23 in 1997 in Japan, and on May 1998 worldwide, and developed by Polyphony Digital. And it was created by Kazunori Yamanouchi, who prior to Gran Turismo, he also created both Motor Toon Grand Prix and Motor Toon Grand Prix 2. He also produced Omega Boost, which is a rail shooter on the PlayStation 1. Gran Turismo 1 was released to universal acclaim and considered by many PS1 fans one of the best PlayStation 1 games ever made, like besides Crash Bandicoot 3 and Spyro 2. That being said, let's see if this game still holds up today. So let's find out. When you boot up the game, you can either choose arcade mode or the real meat of the game, simulation mode, or Gran Turismo mode if you play the PAL version of Gran Turismo 1. The arcade mode is pretty straightforward. You pick your difficulty, your car, your track, and of course, you're good to go. In order to unlock more cars and tracks, Gran Turismo 1 has a quirky way, or should I say weird way, to unlock them, as you need to complete each track 3 times in 3 different classes in order to unlock the remaining tracks in arcade mode. And to unlock more cars, you have to complete the remaining tracks once again 3 times in 3 different classes to unlock new cars. Completing all the courses on the arcade mode will unlock the ending if you complete the arcade mode on the medium difficulty, and the IRS GT mode if you complete the arcade mode on the hard difficulty. However, I wish that you could unlock these tracks or cars only one time, racing the first 4 tracks only one time, regardless of what class you're driving, instead of 3 times. But then again, that would make the arcade mode pretty short and linear, but that's just my opinion. You can also play with your friend in the 2-player mode, so that's pretty cool. When you choose your car, you get to choose either standard driving or drift driving. The standard driving, it's pretty much straightforward, as you drive your car in the normal way or casual, whereas the drifting driving mode turns your car into a drifting monster. The controls of that mode takes a little time to get used to, but when you master it, it's pretty fun and very rewarding. Here, I'll show you the difference between these 2 modes. The simulation mode is the real meat of the game, as instead of choosing your car like you do in the arcade mode, you have to buy your car with your in-game cash. However, at the start of the game, you have to buy a used car, whether it's Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, or Mitsubishi, as the rest of the cars in the game are pretty expensive in the early game. I find the idea of buying used cars in the game pretty awesome and innovative at the time when this game was released on the PlayStation 1. The difference between arcade mode and simulation mode is that unlike arcade mode, the simulation mode, you can actually upgrade your car or your used car into an overpowered beast by adding more horsepower, reducing their weight, and adding better suspension kits and turbo kits, and so on. My favorite part of this is that you can actually turn your car into a race car, which is pretty awesome for the time and pretty innovative. The car roster in Gran Turismo 1 was pretty big for its time. Over 180 licensed cars at your disposal. No other racing game at the time featured the amount of cars that Gran Turismo 1 had. You have a lot of manufacturers in the game, such as Toyota, which has the Supra and the Celica, Nissan, which has the Skyline GTR and the 300ZX, Mitsubishi, which has the GTO, also known as 3000 GT in the later games, the Lancer Evolution 3 and 4, and the FTO. Mazda, which has the RX-7 and the many versions of the MX-5, Honda and Acura, which have the CRX, everyone's favorite dream car, the Civic, and the badass NSX. The Subaru, which has the sedan and the wagon variations of both the Impreza and the Legacy. TVR, which has the Subaru and the Griffith. Aston Martin, James Bond's favorite car manufacturer, has only the DB7, both the normal and the Roadster version. Chevrolet has the Camaro and the Corvette C4, and last but not least, my favorite car brand, Dodge, as my favorite car of all time, the Dodge Viper GTX and R10, and also the most underrated car of all time, the Dodge Concept, also known as the Copperhead in the earlier versions of the game. The Japanese car brands such as Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi have their own special vehicle that cost 500,000 game cash. Some of them resemble the real-life counterparts, such as Castrol Super GT in 1997 and the Nissan Skyline GTR LM, which was used in the Le Mans 1995, and the NSX R LM GT2, which also was used in the Le Mans 1995. All the cars in Gran Turismo 1 don't and never feel the same, as some cars oversteer and others understeer, not to mention that each car have their own drivetrain, such as front drive, front rear drives, mid rear drives, and all-wheel drive, aka four-wheel drive. The front drive cars, such as Honda Civic and Nissan Primera, have a tendency to understeer, and the front rear cars, such as the Supra and the Viper GTX, are pretty much the opposite, as they are prone to oversteer. The mid-rear engine cars, such as the Honda Acura NSX, are pretty much the same as the front-rear engine cars. And finally, the all-wheel drive cars, such as the Impreza and the Skyline, they barely oversteer, and they are pretty good at handling the off-road sections, some of the tracks in the game. There are 11 courses in Gran Turismo 1, with 8 out of 11 available in the arcade mode, whereas the other 3 are not available in the arcade mode, but rather under the simulation mode. High Speed Ring is a good racetrack for beginners who want to test their skills. Trial Mountain is a racetrack which is set in the forest within the mountain area, and it has a lot of corners, tunnels, and a lot of compound corners, so try not to go fast in the corners. Pullman Stage Route 5, which is one of the tracks set at night, and is one of my favorite racetracks, as I remember playing this track all the time in the demo version of the game. Grand Valley Speedway is a pretty long track. It has a lot of S-bend, tight hairpins, tunnels, and the bridge section is pretty beautiful. It's a pretty good racetrack. Autumn Ring, this racetrack, which has a 270-degree corner, that it contains an overpass, not to mention it has a lot of tight corners, conjunction of shorter straight sections, makes it one of the hardest tracks in the game. There's also a small version of the track, which utilizes less than half of the circuit, and it's another good track to begin with. The Test Course, it's a track that focuses mainly on your top speed of your car, and so be sure to bring your fastest car in the game. It is also available in the machine test mode, so you can try your fastest car in the game. Special Stage Route 5 is the complete version of the Club Mint Stage Route 5, which has a lot of hairpins and more tight corners thrown at you, so good luck. Deep Forest is a racetrack set in the forest and has a lot of corners, long sweeping turns, tight corners, you name it. It is one of my favorite tracks in the game because of its presentation and its setting. And also, last but not least, there is Special Stage Route 11, and it has a lot of tight corners, chicanes, and a lot of hairpins. And if you make one mistake, you're totally screwed, as it's hard to make a comeback, since the aforementioned tight corners, hairpins, you fucking name it, are hard to master. However, if you know what you're doing, and not being a total drunk driver like I am, then you shouldn't be scared of this track. However, I still wonder why this track has never appeared in the later games, with the exception of Gran Turismo 3. I'm pretty sure Polyphony Digital should bring this track in the next Gran Turismo Sport update, it would be pretty cool. Overall, I like the track design in Gran Turismo 1, as their presentation are pretty spot on, easy to learn, and pretty fun to drive. And most of them I've returned in the future games of Gran Turismo series. There are many events in Gran Turismo 1. There's 4 main events, such as Sunday Cup, which is pretty easy. Club and Cup has more powerful cars in the event, so you should upgrade your car a little bit in order to win. GT Cup is much harder than the previous ones, as there are a lot of overpowered cars that can make you eat their dirt if you have an underpowered car, so it's mandatory to power your car to the max to increase your chances of winning. And there's GT World Cup, which is the final cup of the game, and there's a lot of race cars this time roaming around, and having a car with racing modifications is 100% mandatory. There's also special events such as the Front Rear Challenge, 4-wheel drive challenges, and also the USA vs Japanese events, and vice versa. There are also some endurance events, which consist in one race event. However, they're pretty lengthy, such as Grand Valley Speedway 300 kilometers. You have to race this track around 60 laps precisely. While they're pretty lengthy, the amount of cash you receive is pretty huge. However, in order to enter these events, you have to obtain a license card. There are 3 licenses in the game: B license, A license, and IA license. Each license has 8 tests, each must be passed within the time limit, otherwise the player will fail if the time runs out. Not to mention, if you cut corners, you will also fail the test. In order to obtain a license, you must complete the 8 license tests of each license. Getting and complete these tests are a cakewalk. However, getting gold on every test, in my opinion, is almost next to impossible. It took me forever to get gold on every test. The IA license is like a time trial, as you have 8 time trials to do, and it's pretty hard to get gold, let alone silver. But I know what you're gonna ask. What is the benefit of getting gold on these licenses? Simple, you get a car reward each time you obtain a license with gold trophies. Since there's only 3 licenses, you get rewarded with 3 prize cars. The AI in this game is pretty standard nowadays, as they're pretty easy to overtake. However, they can be pretty challenging on the hard difficulty in the arcade mode, as they can pose a threat as well in the simulation mode if you don't upgrade your car. There's also a qualify mode in every racing event in the game, but in my honest opinion it's pretty pointless, as you don't earn that much cash, so it's much easier to complete the event without qualifying, as you still get rewarded with a lot of cash after you win the event. And speaking of winning events, when you win an event, you also get a car reward. In my opinion, some of them are okay, but others are pretty badass and cool, like the FDO-LM and the Dodge Viper GTS-R. The physics of Gran Turismo 1 were pretty realistic for its time. Granted, nowadays it's not pretty realistic as the other games released nowadays, but it's still pretty realistic for a PS1 racing game. The aforementioned cars not feeling the same also applies here. The controls at first take some time to get used to, as whenever you go full speed ahead, like most racing games at the time, you have to know when to brake, as tracks have tight corners and hairspins, and not to mention, since all the cars are different in terms of handling, you have to play carefully as the game is meant to be played. There's also some physics changes between the arcade mode and the simulation mode, as the former feels more arcadey, whereas the physics of simulation mode feels the real and the right experience to play the game. Some players like the pick up and play style of the arcade mode, others like the simulation mode for the realistic experience. This game also supports DualShock, so you can use your analog sticks to steer and accelerate. It was pretty innovative at the time, not to mention that the vibration in the game is pretty good, as you can feel the car drifting around the corner and getting off the road. Overall, I think the gameplay of Gran Turismo 1 is amazing for its time and revolutionary. If you complete the final event, or if you complete the arcade mode on the hard difficulty, you will unlock a new mode called GT Race, which you race around the track at 60 frames per second. Yes, you heard that right, 60 frames per second. Now granted, it does reduce a lot of details around the track, not to mention there's only 3 courses in this mode: Club 1 Stage Route 5, Special Stage Route 5, and Special Stage Route 11. However, make no mistake, it still looks amazing, especially in the replays, and it looks even better at the time, as it was jaw-dropping to see a racing game at 60 FPS. The other game I can recall that does that is Ridge Racer Turbo. Gran Turismo's graphics were, and still to this day, pretty amazing for a PS1 game. The car models at the time were pretty realistic, which made the other racing games' car models look like trash. Furthermore, the presentation is really good, as a lot of the tracks have real-life brands like Toyota, TRD, Castrol, Nismo, TBR, you name it. Hence why this game is a real racing simulator, and it does the job pretty well. There's also some good minor attention to detail, such as washing your car. It gets a lot of reflections during the replays. And speaking of replays, at the time, they were pretty jaw-dropping. The viewing angles were pretty spot on, not to mention you could change what card you want to see during the replays. Not to mention the menus interface were pretty great and were easy to understand as well. Overall, I think the graphics and the presentation were pretty amazing when this game was released, and I still think this game is still amazing nowadays. The cars look pretty good, not to mention the attention to detail is pretty spot on. The music in Gran Turismo 1 is pretty amazing. However, the soundtrack of both the Japanese and the American versions are different, as the American version uses a lot of licensed music, such as Cubinate Skeletal, Chemical Brothers, Garbage's As Heaven Is Wide, and Ash's Lose Control. Whereas the Japanese version features original soundtrack composed both by Mashiro Ando and Isamu Ohira. They also composed the entire soundtrack Gran Turismo 2 as well. Gran Turismo 1 main opening theme in the American version is Chemical Brothers' Everything Must Go, whereas the Japanese version used one of the most iconic themes ever, the Moon Over the Castle, as this is used in every Gran Turismo game onwards. The music in the menus are again different. The Japanese version is actually more relaxing, whereas the American version and the European version is more rock and badass. Here, I'll show you the difference between both of them. The sound design in Gran Turismo 1 is good, although the sound is a little bit rusty. It's by no means awful. Every car's engine sound is pretty different, not to mention how the car wheels sound when you drift around the corners sounded pretty good at the time. If you ask me which soundtrack I like the most, I wouldn't say I liked them both, but I'll let you decide in the comment section which soundtrack is your favorite. So what's my final verdict on Gran Turismo 1? In a word, amazing. Gran Turismo 1 revolutionized the racing genre and created the simulation genre, and it did pretty good. The gameplay is near perfect, the graphics, while dated nowadays compared to the recent racing games, are amazing for a PS1 game, and the sound design and the music is pretty great. Only amazing things can only describe this game in a nutshell. As far as how to get this game, you can buy this game used on Amazon, and it doesn't cost that much, like $9 to $15 if you have a PS3 lying around. So overall, Gran Turismo 1 is an amazing game. Thanks for watching everyone, and make sure to hit the like button and click the subscribe button and the bell notification for more content and updates. Also, let me know your thoughts about Gran Turismo 1. Did you enjoy the game? What did you like? What did you not like? And what were your favorite moments in Gran Turismo 1? Thanks for watching, and peace out. See you next time.